Hello and welcome to Gender and Geopolitics, my short 10-minute series where I have conversations with women around the world about different topics. My name is Emily Prey and I'm the director of the Gender Policy Portfolio and of the Mass Atrocities and International Law Portfolio at the New Lines Institute based in Washington, D.C. Today, I am speaking with my friend Homira May Rezai about the genocide and persecution of the Hazara in Afghanistan. Thank you for joining me, Homira.
Thank you for having me, Emily.
Can you tell us a bit about how the Taliban's gender apartheid in Afghanistan has affected Hazara women?
Well, it has compounded discrimination with targeted vulnerability. So Hazara women are facing the Taliban system of gender persecution. You see restrictions on education, employment, movement, public life, and access to services. On top of being part of an ethnic and religious minority that has been long scapegoated and attacked. And under the Taliban, the spaces for Hazara women that previously relied on for safety and independence, so your school, universities, NGOs, public-facing work, community networks have been deliberately dismantled, leaving many more isolated, economically trapped, and exposed to coercion. For Hazara women, that isolation isn't abstract. It affects whether you can travel safely, seek healthcare, report threats, or earn an income without fear. So when women are pushed out of public life, it also becomes harder for communities like the Hazaras in particular to document abuses and advocate for protection, because the very people that are most affected are silenced. So gender apartheid makes women invisible. For Hazara women, that invisibility becomes a security risk.
I think looking at the intersectional dimensions of conflict and vulnerabilities is so important. It's something that is not discussed in many conflict situations. So I'm really glad that you're constantly highlighting this for the situation of the Hazaras. The Hazaras, as you briefly mentioned, have been victims of genocide over the course of many years with many different perpetrators. Currently, there is evidence that the Taliban and ISKP are committing genocide against the Hazaras. What should the UK and other countries who are state parties to the Genocide Convention be doing to respond to this?
I think we need to really treat this as an urgent atrocity prevention and accountability challenge. A challenge, not just a sort of a distant human rights concern. As you said, there is credible legal analysis, and New Lines Institute have done amazing work that shows that Genocide Convention is being breached in relation to attacks on Hazaras, and states have duties to act using all reasonably available means to prevent and punish genocide. I guess in practical terms, that means that the UK and other state members should push for a stronger UN Security Council and Human Rights Council action, protect and resource the United Nations Special Rapporteur mandate, and support evidence collection and reporting for future prosecution. The ICC, for example, investigation on Afghanistan does not investigate crimes of genocide. And we've gone as far as gender persecution, but the intersectionality needs to be a mandate and needs to come quick to understand to have a better understanding of the persecution of the Hazaras and how women are affected in gender persecution, or how Hazara women and other vulnerable communities are affected in here. And we need to support international justice, so public back pathways and accountability, and that includes the cooperation with the international mechanism and prosecution for atrocity crimes. We need to use targeted pressure and expand targeted sanctions and travel bans where evidence supports it, and disrupt the financing and facilitation network for perpetrators at Taliban, ISK, and condition any engagement on measurable human rights benchmark, especially women's rights and minority protection. So when regional countries are engaging with the Taliban, there needs to be accountability. When we have politicians engaging with the Taliban, there got to be accountability. We need to have a benchmark on centering human rights and minority rights. Protection pathways, so we need to ensure genuinely accessible protection and resettlement routes for those heightened risk, including Hazara women, human rights defenders, and those facing targeted threats. Humanitarian aid with safeguards. We need to maintain that life-saving aid, but tighten monitoring so it doesn't entrench discriminatory system or empower abuses, which unfortunately at the moment it currently does. We need to have a better monitoring system where our humanitarian aid and humanitarian development is being used properly.
Thank you so much for that very comprehensive set of recommendations. I think you've made it very clear that there are legal options, there are policy options, there are political options for states who are willing to take a stand against genocide. How does it feel to be a Hazara woman and an Afghan woman right now?
It feels like living with two kind of grief at once. The grief of what has been taken and what we've lost, the right for education, the right for work, movement. We're not allowed to travel without mahram. Voice, we're not even allowed to speak to other women and gather together. And grief for the normalization of it by the world, and how the world does not take this seriously, how the Western feminists have been completely quiet and silent about the situation of women in Afghanistan. Many of us feel a constant tension between fear and responsibility. Fear of family and community under an increasingly violent, discriminative system, and the responsibility to keep speaking when silence is exactly what perpetrators rely on. It also feels so exhausting to have to prove that your pain qualifies. Whether is it bad enough for headlines, visas or international actions, while watching the erasure of women and the targeting of minorities treated as a tolerable background noise, and often described as culture. This is Afghan's culture. Well, me as someone who's from Afghanistan, as someone who's Hazara, I can narrate what my culture is and what my story is, and what is happening in Afghanistan should not be normalized.
I think you make a really good point that the silence has been deafening, and especially I think there is a big opportunity for feminists from the US, from the UK, from countries that withdrew from Afghanistan that led to this horrible situation where the Taliban took over. And people really need to speak up about the Hazaras and about gender apartheid and the atrocities happening that the Taliban and other actors are accountable for. Very quickly, Afghanistan is a telling case in this with the Doha talks and other negotiations and peace talks over the years. Why is it so important that women are part of peace processes?
I think when peace agreements that exclude women routinely exclude reality. We saw that during the so-called Doha peace process, where women of Afghanistan were completely denied of their right to speak at these forums. Civil society were not present, were not part of that discussion, which made the civil society were made of majority women. Women bring what peace tables often ignore: how power is enforced at home, schools, prisons, hospitals, and workplaces, and how conflict and ideology reshape daily life. This is particularly important in the context of Afghanistan, because it's women at home who looks after and manages the household. And when women aren't present, deals focus on elites and armed actors. And the result is a settlement that leaves structural violence intact, and exactly what Afghanistan demonstrates. And we saw the failure of that during the Doha peace process. And there's also very strong evidence that inclusion improves durability. And I know there's a research cited by the UN Women and others shows that women's participation actually increases the probability of a peace agreement lasting around 20%, more likely to last at least 2 years, and 35% likely to last 15 years when women are meaningfully involved during the process. So the Women, Peace and Security agenda, starting with UN Security Council Resolution 1325, recognizes that women's participation is not symbolic. It is the core to international peace and security. Countries like Afghanistan, we need to center the voices of women from marginalized communities, including the Hazaras, religious minorities, and others who have long been persecuted. Because when women are excluded, you don't get peace, you get a pause that leaves half the population behind, i.e. Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Homira. I want to end on your quote that peace agreements that exclude women exclude reality. I think that's incredibly powerful. Thank you so much for your time and for your expertise and for joining me on Gender and Geopolitics today.
Thank you for having me.